And then also after that, you have Leon Salgage. He was, it's debatable whether he was more inspired by anarchism or by mental illness that he had. But he assassinated U.S. President William McKinley, and this created a wave of hostility against anarchists. A lot didn't defend him because they felt that the act wasn't productive, but some did. So sometime around the 19th and 20th centuries, the anarchist Black Cross was created, and in contrast to, say, the Red Cross, which gave aid to, say, prisoners of conscience, the Black Cross gave aid to any prisoner who was imprisoned for doing something that they felt furthered the struggle for anarchism, for liberation. So even violent revolutionaries were helped by the anarchist Black Cross. And the anarchist Black Cross does exist today. They do prisoner support, things like that. But in contrast to this, Leo Tolstoy, the famous author, came up. He was very much inspired by Christianity, and the ideas of Christian anarchism, closely related to anarcho-pacifism. A lot of this comes from Tolstoy's idea that the anarchists are right about everything except that they're trying to use violence, when what they should be doing is peacefully persuading people, peacefully building a new society. So this was very, very influential. And of course, you see anarchist ideas expressed in literature later by Ursula Le Guin, Robert Heinlein, J. Neil Schulman, L. Neil Smith, Alan Moore, and plenty of others. So after, you also have, around this time, feminism is becoming a major force on the anarchist movement. It gave a more personal view of the woman question, how women were really suppressed, both legally and socially. And I think it contributed a greater view of personal freedoms, that we're not just here for the ability to freely exchange, freely live, but also the ability to go out in public without having to wear ridiculous covering up uniform or be scandalized. So Voltairine de Cleyre and Emma Goldman were major proponents. They're major female anarchists who had this idea of personal liberation. Prior to that, Lucy Parsons was a major, influential woman in the anarchist movement. And of course, there are others, but I kind of have to run through some stuff here. So in 1905, the IWW was formed. Many anarchists were involved in this. Basically, they stood for abolition of the wage system. They were one of the first unions to be open to immigrants and ethnic minorities. And they basically, it was a horizontally organized union. There wasn't a union boss. It was based on what the members wanted. In 1910, you have the Mexican Revolution. A lot of anarchists were involved in this, especially at first, before the more statist elements took control of the revolution, which kind of seems to happen a lot. This really shows how anarchism had kind of spread, the ideas had spread from the West. They're in Mexico. South America had a huge anarchist movement. When indigenous people were supposed to be drafted for labor, anarchists helped organize resistance. China had a very large anarchist movement. And among the early Zionists, there were a lot of anarchist ideas. The idea that, the Muslim and the Jewish population could live in peace in a free society that they would create. So World War I, kind of, a lot of people say it's really where the 20th century began, and it certainly had a major influence on the development of all political thought, especially anarchism. The vast majority of anarchists were opposed to World War I. They saw it as just an opportunity for politicians to get more power by killing, the poorest people in society. There were some exceptions to this. Benjamin Tucker was one. Pyotr Kropotkin was another prominent anarchist who they supported the Allies in World War I. Partly, I think, was because there was a perception that the German culture and German militarism was much worse than what existed in, say, France, and they want to preserve this, the the liberalism by which a free society could spring. And then, of course, after following World War I directly leads to the fall of the Russian Tsar and the Russian Revolution. The Bolsheviks didn't take control at first, and there was a major social revolution going on where people who had been exploited by centuries by state-favored landlords and the state were setting up their own ways of distributing things, of organizing society. And then the Bolsheviks clamped down on that. Nestor Makhno and other anarchists were involved in creating a large area of Ukraine that was relatively autonomous. They held off the Ukrainian Nationalist Army. The Axis powers at first, they kicked out of Ukraine, the Ukrainian Nationalist Army, and then the Bolshevik Red Army. They also had to face down, and finally they were crushed by the Bolshevik Army. I think the whole Cold War, you see Marxism, authoritarian communism becoming a more well-known force counter to the West than anarchism is. So you have, I just want to point out that in the Ukraine, there was a lot of anti-Semitism, and the anarchists were kind of on the leading edge of opposing this. There were lots of Jews who were in the Black Army and in lots of anarchist collectives at the time. Anarchists encouraged Jews to defend themselves from pogroms, and there was, Nestor Makhno made it a point to include Jews as they were against nationalism. Liberation was for everyone. So I'm going to skip ahead here to opposition to fascism. And you see this major point of this is in Spain. In July of 1936, forces led by, they were eventually would become to be led by Francisco Franco. They tried to institute a coup against the Republic and institute a military dictatorship. And anarchists were among the resistors to this. The CNT-FAI was a large anarchist organization affiliated with radical labor organizing, and they fought against the fascist powers. Essentially, what happened to revolutionary Spain was that Stalinism and Stalinist insanity, Stalinist paranoia, and Stalinist authoritarianism took over all the anti-fascist forces and just destroyed the resistance. And then the Francoists were able to conquer Spain. But anarchist resistance to fascism didn't end there. There were a lot of anarchist resistors to Nazi Germany. Large autonomous areas were carved out by people resisting Japanese occupation. So I want to take a quick stop here, and we have 10 minutes left. So I want to talk about the development of market anarchism after World War II. Modern free market libertarian thought often dates from the 40s. And in the 50s and especially 60s, you see this idea of anarcho-capitalism being expressed. Murray Rothbard, David Friedman, major proponents of this. Rothbard held that capitalism was about unrestricted exchange, so the fullest expression of capitalism was anarchism, the fullest expression of anarchism was capitalism. He drew upon individualist anarchism as well as classical liberal philosophers, particularly Austrian school economists. And he was against the state giving handouts to capitalists, but like most anarcho-capitalists, was not opposed to wage labor or workplace hierarchy. So this creates a little conflict, which I don't really have time to go into, unfortunately. But Rothbard was a major developer of free market thought, and market anarchism and social anarchism kind of developed along different paths of evolution after this. In the 1960s, of course, there's a lot going on politically throughout the West. Also, of course, around the world. But in America, you have, for example, Karl Hess. He was a former Goldwater speechwriter who found in anarchism what he really wanted all along. So he becomes an anarchist. You have the Situationist International that becomes a major philosophical influence on anarchism. And they were also a major influence on the student and worker revolts in France of May of 1968. You also see environmentalism coming into the fold here. Murray Bookchin was a guy who kind of brought this into the anarchist movement a lot. This led to green anarchy, and this is expressed a lot by John Zerzan and Derek Jensen. And this also leads to this idea of primitivism, that civilization or industrial civilization itself